Kalen Thorne stood perfectly still in the geometric center of the High Council chamber. The ambient light caught the silver threading of his diplomatic robes, but his eyes were entirely empty of their usual warmth. He tapped a restricted military frequency on his wrist console, took a slow breath, and spoke a single word into the dead air. Begin. What happens when the galaxy's most disciplined pacifist finally stops holding back? 3 hours ago, the most dangerous object in Kalen's hand had been a crystal flute of synth wine. It vibrated slightly from the Zenith Spire's atmospheric scrubbers, a fragile thing held loosely while he smiled at hostile dignitaries. Beneath the vaulted glass of the spire, a low hum of polite conversation drifted upward. Sola leaned against the observation railing, studying the man she had built a quiet, sunlit life with. Kalen wore the soft, woven fabric of civilian robes, his posture remarkably relaxed as he navigated the labyrinthine customs of the Chitin Collective. Terrans were broadly considered soft by the wider galaxy, a species that valued discourse over dominance. Kalen played the part flawlessly, bowing at the precise geometric angle required to appease the towering, heavily armored delegates. High Arbiter Vax stepped forward, clicking his mandibles. The sound was unmistakable derision, echoing sharply across the polished floor. Vax's translated voice boomed over the ambient music, mocking the fragile marrow of humanity, calling them scavengers playing dress-up in the halls of true conquerors. The insult was loud, a deliberate provocation. Kalen didn't flinch. He merely raised his flute, offering a toast so drenched in multi-layered Athelian politeness that Vax proudly accepted the compliment before realizing his entire lineage had just been gracefully dismissed. Sola exhaled, her shoulders dropping in relief. She admired his restraint. She knew the piece he projected was a disciplined choice he made every single day. Then the Zenith Spire's primary lighting snapped to a harsh, violent crimson. A deafening klaxon. Then absolute chaos. Holographic tactical maps violently overrode the gala's ambient displays, casting red shadows over the panicked diplomats. Warning markers bloomed across 5 separate star sectors simultaneously. Sola pushed through the surging crowd, her gaze locked on the main projection. The Chitin Collective wasn't just posturing for territory. It was a synchronized, multi-system annihilation campaign. And the largest cluster of hostile signatures was burning straight through the atmosphere of Oasis Prime. Their home. Kalen was already moving. He vaulted the decorative barrier, his civilian robes billowing out of place as he sprinted toward the High Council's emergency session. By the time Sola reached the heavy chamber doors, Kalen was projecting a hastily constructed framework for an immediate ceasefire. His voice was steady, desperately pleading for diplomatic intervention and offering massive concessions. Overlord Krell's face materialized on the central monolith, towering above the frantic assembly. He didn't offer demands. He simply broadcast a live, unencrypted visual feed from the surface of Oasis Prime. The image was a slaughter. Athelian silver architecture was burning, melting under the treads of Chitin siege engines. The council chamber fell into a suffocating silence. Sola gripped the metal doorframe until her joints ached as the projection shifted to a localized ground facility. A prisoner was dragged into the frame. Mira. Overlord Krell leaned into the visual pickup, his mandibles spread wide in a victorious display, claiming the child as a permanent trophy of a conquered world. Sola looked away from the screen and stared at Kalen. The diplomat was gone. The man who carefully measured every smile, who tolerated every insult to keep the peace, had vanished, leaving behind something terrifyingly still. Which meant this wasn't a negotiation. It was. Kalen slowly lowered his hands from the podium. Stick around. The galaxy is about to learn exactly why Terrans chose peace in the first place. The High Council erupted into a chaotic symphony of panicked clicking and shouted translations. Sola wanted to step forward, to offer the traditional Athelian forehead touch to ground him. But the man at the podium was suddenly unreachable. The soft, woven fabric of his civilian robes now hung awkwardly on his frame, looking less like diplomatic attire and more like a costume he was violently shedding. Overlord Krell continued to laugh through the projection, his mandibles clicking with the absolute certainty of a conqueror who believed he had cornered a grazing animal. Kalen ignored the roaring room. He did not raise his voice. He stated his final terms with chilling clarity, offering one last chance for the Khitan fleet to withdraw, release all captives, and completely disarm, or face the Iron Aegis Protocol. The Khitan warlord simply cut the feed. Solo watched the gentle diplomat she loved strip away his carefully constructed humanity piece by piece, realizing with a cold certainty that the man who had spent years mastering Athelian poetry was actually a dormant extinction event waiting for a reason to wake. He raised his wrist console. He tapped the restricted frequency, and then the single word fell from his lips into the dead air. The Ghost Armada arrived. They ripped out of slip space directly from the galaxy's forgotten dead zones, a sprawling fleet of matte-black warships that seemed to absorb the starlight around them. There were no further communications. There were no demands for surrender. The tactical holograms in the council chamber flickered as entire Khitan armadas simply ceased to exist. The Terran ships executed high-speed micro-jumps with devastating, mechanical precision, appearing instantaneously inside the Khitan defensive formations, gutting their heavy dreadnoughts with kinetic bombardment, and vanishing into slipspace before the resulting debris could even scatter. Simultaneously, Kalen's flagship bypassed the fleet engagement entirely, locking onto the Khitan home suns to deliver a demonstration of absolute, terrifying power. They fired localized gravitational shear pulses directly into the stellar cores. By artificially inducing extreme hydrostatic imbalance deep within the fusion layers of the stars, the pulses forced the massive bodies to violently convulse. The skies of the Khitan homeworlds burned blinding white, threatening an artificial supernova without actually breaking the terminal threshold. It was a display of godlike control. Faced with the immediate, unavoidable incineration of their entire species, the Khitan collective surrendered unconditionally across all frequencies. Special forces extracted Mira from the ground facility within 4 minutes of the first shot. The sweeping invasion that was supposed to cripple 5 sectors was dismantled before the council session had even officially adjourned. Overlord Krell, his arrogance entirely shattered by the convulsing sky above his own palace, signed a treaty that immediately stripped the collective of all its military power. He sat in the unlit quarters, shivering beside his discarded civilian robes. Sola knelt on the deck, pressing her forehead firmly against his trembling skin, an Athelian anchor of absolute trust. She closed her eyes, finalizing her secured diplomatic log in the quiet shadows. A predator, yes, but one that chose a cage. We will be here tomorrow with another story from the deep black. Come back then.